Oops. Let me go back a slide. There we go. Hi, welcome back to class. This is Module 4, and the rest of this module, or the rest of this class rather, starting with Module 4, is going to be a lot more focused on our topic of love, sex, and globalization. And one of the first things we're going to talk about in particular is economic development, and you've been exposed to this a little bit already when I talked about globalization and McDonald's, the way that China economically developed and thus got this McDonald's, or got many McDonald's, and then we started talking about cultural imperialism. But I'd like to start talking about South Korea in particular. I've also given you, the first few weeks of this class, I'm kind of throwing a lot at you with these various topics, but I'm going to start bringing them together, particularly this week. So, I want to talk about South Korea because it's the place that I've done most of my research, and I want to look at the way economic development has changed dating and love and sex and things that we want to talk about. There in particular. So I've got this sort of question. What effect has globalization had on Korean society and social relationships between the sexes? So if you've done this week's reading on perusal, then you kind of know where I might be going with this. But at the top image, I'll have to move my face around because it's a little in the way. And the top image is a sort of bubble bath party. These were common in the United States when I was in college. I don't know if common is the right word, but they happened in the United States when I was in college, and now they are also in South Korea. It's sort of like a rave, drug use. I don't know how much drug use takes place in South Korea, but a lot of drinking and people wearing bikinis and showing a whole bunch of their skin, very modern and something that we recognize. Whereas this right image is only about 100 years ago. It's not that long ago. It's from 1908. And in some of the more conservative parts of South Korea, in typically southwest South Korea, which would be like the Gwangju area, women were really not allowed out of the house. Even in other parts of South Korea, women weren't allowed out of the house without a male chaperone. And in some places, these very conservative places, the women were even required to be veiled, as you see here. And we don't typically associate veiling with South Korea or women outside of the Middle East, in fact. But it was a common practice in a lot of places in the world, and the seclusion of women was common. Now, this next slide, which I already showed by accident, is a picture of a 47-year-old boy and an 11-year-old man. So think about that for a minute. Why do you think this is a picture of a 47-year-old boy and an 11-year-old man? That's kind of a funny thing. Maybe you could answer that. 47-year-old boy, 11-year-old man. Well, the reason is, I'll keep my face over there, the reason is that this man is unmarried. Again, this is a picture from 1908 or 1902, right around the early 1900s. This man is an indentured servant, I'm calling him man, I should be saying boy. This 47-year-old boy on the left is an indentured servant of this man on the right, who is an 11-year-old man, but he is married. And in Korean fashion, in Korean custom at this time, you wouldn't refer to him as being a man unless he was married. Otherwise, you would call him a boy. And this photo looks really awkward because normally these two would not be standing near each other. He's an indentured servant, but in actuality and in all probability, he will be a slave. There's no way that he is likely to be able to earn enough money at the wages he earns to ever buy his freedom. And so he's really more or less the slave of this younger person. This person is a yangban, that is the aristocratic elite, the elite of South Korean society. He probably owns all of this land, and he was probably married off when he was even younger, like 8, 9, 10, or 11 years old. They get married to another yangban elite. That doesn't mean they're having sex or consummating their marriage, but these wealthy families, as you're learning, traditional marriage, whatever that term means, marriage of the past, was often really related to economic issues and securing social status for your family. And so he's already been married off to another young woman who might even be 5 years old or something like that. So yeah, marriage is very important in South Korean society historically. It's important in many societies historically, but it's part of becoming a true adult for Korean men, and is very, very bound up, as you've been learning about modern Korean dating, with economics. And we like to pretend that those things are separated, but they're absolutely not separated. So let's go to our next slide. This is another historical image of a wedding in South Korea. Excuse me for having to keep moving my head around. But this research was done by a really famous anthropologist named Laura Kendall in 1996. And this image is again from the early 1900s. This man is getting married to this woman. And actually, this is the first time that this young man has ever laid eyes on the woman he is marrying. Never seen her before. The parents probably got together beforehand and chose the young woman, maybe because she was really good at sewing. Women were valued for their ability to sew clothing for the family. She was probably chosen because she was healthy and able to bear children, but not necessarily beautiful. That wasn't important. So it was, again, a lot of economic factors. Is she going to be able to make lots of children, which is important for the household economy? Is she going to be able to sew clothing that we find acceptable and want to wear? And the man was chosen for similar reasons. Does he have a strong back, able to work in the fields, those kinds of things? So this is the first time he's ever seen his bride. He has no input, almost no input, in the choice of who he will marry. However, he has a lot more input than her because actually she has not seen her husband for the first time. Her eyelids are actually glued shut, and she won't get to see her husband until after the wedding ceremony, once they enter the marital chamber and they unglue her eyelids, and she will see him before consummating the marriage, or hopefully before. It's not as terrible as it sounds. It sounds grisly, but it's not as terrible as it sounds. The glue is not. It's not like they're using super glue or wacky glue or something like that. The glue they use is actually sticky rice. So if you got the water after you make rice and it's like really tacky, and you put it on your eyelids and let it dry, it will stick closed very well. And then you just put water on it again and it loosens it up. So it's not like they're using wacky glue. But Laura Kendall, when she's doing this research, writes, if Korean brides, talking about modern dating, because she did her research in the 1990s, so she's looking at dating in the 90s when love marriages first started to appear, when people first, maybe not first, but were starting to become more popular for the average citizen to be able to pick their own bride, pick their own spouse. And she writes, if Korean brides are now more than pawns in the matrimonial schemes of their elders, they are less than equal players in a marital enterprise constructed on the premise that women attract and men choose. And so in many ways, not that much has changed from the 1900s to the 1990s when Laura Kendall was doing her research on Korean dating and marriage. And in a lot of ways, not that much has changed since the 90s to the 2020s when I was doing my research. So a man's worth is defined by his career, and a woman's future is by the man that she marries. Women attract, men select. Very interesting, but things have changed a lot in some ways. So as soon as my slides will change, there we go. Getting married in Korea is present. You can ignore a lot of this terminology that I have, neolocal, patrilocal, because you haven't learned that yet. You're going to learn that, I believe, in the next module. But you can refer back. So love marriages have become, that is marriage where the spouses get to choose their own marriage partner, where parents aren't often nearly as involved as they used to in mate selection. Love marriages are present, but parents still hold veto power. So many parents can still say, okay, you can marry for love whoever you want, but not that person. They might veto certain people. And arranged marriages are still fairly common. Less common than they used to be, but several people in my research still had arranged marriages. Matchmakers, the use of matchmakers who go around and give you these sort of personality tests and things like that to try to find a partner for you still exist, and they're still very popular, although many of them have moved online, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And this sort of explosion of dating services has taken place. And these dating services, like a lot of things in South Korean dating, are highly commodified, highly integrated with the market. And they have these really complex systems of gift exchange before marriage, where the male's family pays for a new home and new furnishings, and the female's family pays for the wedding ceremony itself. So your family has to have a certain amount of money for you to even be able to be considered a marriage partner. If your family, if you're male and you want to get married, your family has to have the money to pony up for the new house, and these can be very expensive, especially in Seoul. Sort of really crazy real estate prices there, and also all the furnishings. The refrigerator, the beds, and all this stuff. It's very, very expensive. While the female has to pay for the wedding ceremony, which can be very expensive as well. Now, I should explain this image. This isn't a typical Korean wedding by any means, but there is a large Christian sect that they're called the Moonies. they're a little bit like the Mormons or something like that in the United States, but they have these very large, sometimes group arranged weddings, so arranged marriages. So all these people are meeting there spouse for the very first time. And this is all done by the matchmaking abilities of the church. These people are all young Mooney disciples, and they want to get married to other Moonies, and so the church sort of matches them together, and then they have these big, elaborate one-day wedding ceremonies where they all get married in mass. Kind of interesting. Again, not totally typical, but this does happen in South Korea.